We're a minute early. How about that? I've never seen that in my entire life. Thank you all for being here tonight. Super excited for this conversation, and no one's here to hear me talk, so I'll be up here for about a minute and then hand it over to the good stuff. But my name is Thomas Guest, and I'm the founder of BRIM, up there somewhere. I co-organized this event series with the Urban Future Lab and with Pat, and this specific event with Dollaride and with Sue. So, a little bit on BRIM. We are a youth-led global climate movement. So we connect folks from all over the world wanting to work on projects together. And we do storytelling and project work. So if anyone's interested in learning more, come find me. But this is all about the people up here that you see today. And when we think about climate as the new economy, we're not here to make rich people more money. We're here to reimagine things from the bottom up and using climate change as an opportunity to do that, right? So today we're talking about transportation, and Sue, when I met him and heard his story and heard the story of Dollaride, I thought, okay, here's an example of a group that's taking a risk and reimagining things truly, how we structure our world and how it works. So with that, I'll hand it over to Pat, and we'll kick off the panel.
Thank you so much, Tom. Sure. I run the Urban Future Lab, which is on the 7th floor of this building. It's part of the $10 School of Engineering. And we're the innovation hub for best. This is being recorded. Do we need to do this?
It is being recorded.
Well,
Let's see, we run, we're the innovation hub for best in class climate tech companies who come to us for help with commercialization. We run several programs downstairs, the most known of which is the Acre Incubator, and Susani has been in the Acre Incubator for many years now. So I'm pleased to introduce my panel mates here. Next to me is Tracy Capers, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Program Officer of the Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation. Next to her is Richard Mai, Senior Project Manager in Clean Transportation with NYSERDA. Allison Martinez is next. She's the founder of Brooklyn Level Up. And Susani is the founder and CEO of Dollaride. So this is a sort of a story in formation. It's about a different way of doing urban planning. It's the antithesis of what I learned in architecture school a zillion years ago, where the architect was God and we marched into a neighborhood and we built what we thought was beautiful because we were smarter than everyone else. And that's not the way to do it. This is what Robert Moses did. This is why we're cut off from the water all around Manhattan. That's crazy. This is why some of the public housing is very difficult to live in. And this is the story of an entrepreneur and a community who decided to do it differently. And we still don't know how the story is going to come out. Will it be better because we're doing it this way? We're not sure. We're going to talk about what's being done now. You can all decide in a few years when you see what has happened in the neighborhood. Community involvement is paramount. We must think about involving the community in every kind of urban infrastructure, insertion, transportation work, swales that go into a neighborhood to avoid stormwater problems, bike paths, EV chargers. All of this should be done together with input from the community. And that's what's happening with this project. So we're going to learn tonight what happens when you include the voice of the community in planning projects. Sue, way down there somewhere, I'd love it if you would start off by telling us what CTAP stands for, what it is, and what you're trying to do.
Thank you, Pat. That was excellent framing. So everyone, hi. I'm Susani, the founder and CEO of Dollaride. And I'll explain a little bit about CTAP, kind of give you like a clinical description of the program, but Obviously we're here today to talk more about the details and the nitty gritty of pursuing a project like this that really centers community in the development process. So first and foremost, CTAP stands for Clean Transit Access Program. And it's a project that aims to electrify New York City dollar vans. Before I even proceed further, who here has heard of or used a dollar van before by show of hands? Yeah, raise it higher. Let me see. All right, 10 of you. Great. Now you'll learn more today. Nonetheless, the project provides licensed commuter van drivers, AKA dollar vans, with access to over 100 electric vehicles and charging stations in an effort to deliver economic and environmental benefits of clean transportation to underserved communities. CTAP is led by Dollaride, a mobility company focused on improving transit access and equity in urban communities. NYSERDA, which is here today, seeded the program with a $10 million grant award. And in partnership with Dollaride, CTAP is being delivered by a coalition of New York-based organizations, including Block Power, HEVO, Build Edison, NYU C2 Smart, Perch Advisors, and Brooklyn Level Up. The program will expand from a small area in Flatbush, Brooklyn, to multiple neighborhoods throughout Queens and Brooklyn, with the potential to reach the scope of 120,000 daily riders. In its first cycle of 100 electric vehicles, the program will remove 5,400 metric tons of carbon emissions from the community, which is the equivalent of removing 1,200 cars off the road. The new electric dollar van fleet will support clean air and clean rides for local communities throughout New York City, while also reducing the operational costs for commuter van drivers. So I know that was a mouthful, but now we're digging into the details and really explain what all this means and hear the good and the bad of developing, a project like this. So I'll kick it back to you, Pat.
Thank you, Sue. That was very clear. And it's a wonderful project, by the way. So I think we should start off by having Tracy and Richard and Allison just say who they are, what their organization is. Even though I gave you their name and title, I'd like them to tell you how they got introduced to CTAP and just a little bit about their role in CTAP before I start asking real questions. Okay, so here you go.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Capers. I'm Chief Program Officer for Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation. And so a little bit about Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation. We are the nation's first community development corporation in the country. We were started by Robert F. Kennedy and Jacob Javits. And while we're based in Bed-Stuy, we're really a borough-wide organization. And really our mission is, we have a really bold mission of disrupting and closing the racial wealth gap. But in that context, we do everything. We're really about improving the quality of life of neighborhoods and uplifting the people who live in those neighborhoods. So that means we're involved in housing, arts and culture, food, and transportation, all the spaces. And so in terms of my role as Chief Program Officer, I oversee a suite of programs, first around economic mobility. So I'm interested in helping our community gain access to financial assets, whether it's home ownership, jobs. So I have a whole suite of programs there, but then also around the social determinants of health. Looking at the built environment and the transportation environment. So how I got involved, I met Sue through, he spoke on a panel to youth, and then he also came to learn about some of the work that we've done with City Bike, which I'll share about later. And but I'm very interested in working with Sue in this project, particularly for its benefits of the community, not only helping us get around transportation deserts, but also how it can employ Black and brown people in the community.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Mai. I'm a senior project manager with NYSERDA. For those of you that aren't familiar, that stands for the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I know that's a mouthful. A little bit about NYSERDA as a whole, we work a lot with utilities, and we try to generate, innovations in clean energy. I work specifically on the clean transportation space. That includes EVs, new mobility programs, electric micro mobility, and also electrified microtransit like CTAP. So yeah, how we got involved with CTAP, we ran this open competition, the Clean Transportation Prizes, in conjunction with other state agencies and the utilities. And we reviewed many proposals and, selected the best of the best. So here we are today, and happy to work more with this team. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Allison Martinez. I'm co-founder of Brooklyn Level Up. We are a community development corporation that is focused on supporting BIPOC-owned small businesses and residents in East Flatbush, and Flatlands, Brooklyn. Our work is really varied. It really stems from just the need to support community and help them to do what our mission is, which is to maximize access to build community wealth. We actually got involved with CTAP because of our community partner, WXY Studio, who helped us with a rezoning project. And then they were like, you should meet Sue. You have a lot in common and could probably work together on some projects. And that's exactly what's happened.
Okay, so there's your back. Oops.
Is this on still? Yeah. Okay, Tracy, you alluded to the city bike issue. I was about to say problem. Let's talk about how City Bike approached you, or how you approached City Bike, and how well that project worked or didn't work.
So I'll start small and then you, okay, let's see. Happy anniversary, City Bike. If you didn't know, it's the 10th year anniversary of City Bike in New York City. Did you know that? So yeah, but so
Give it up for City Bike.
yeah. But so what's interesting about that is, imagine 10 years ago, if you were here, like we didn't know what this, before City Bike was even a concept, Department of Planning, City Planning, and Department of Transportation came to Restoration, and they wanted to introduce this concept, to the community. And they wanted us to help, usher it into the community. And, I remember at the time, without even seeing a bike, didn't understand what it was. And the closest thing I could understand about it was like Zipcar for bikes. But the upshot was, when City Bike came into the neighborhood, Bed-Stuy was actually the first low-income community of color where the bike share system came into, because it was really mainly in Manhattan, and then downtown Brooklyn, and then a sliver of Bed-Stuy initially. So they obviously, there was a lot of fear and concern about, like, what is this thing? We didn't ask for this thing. There goes the neighborhood. Another sign of gentrification. And so, and I was, and people were like, we didn't ask for it, we don't want it, we don't ride bikes, or, we don't know how to use it, all kinds of, we're not, it's gonna take our parking spot, the whole cacophony of stuff. And so in that context, they asked us to get involved. And I was a little reluctant, but what we decided to do was, like, because it was coming into the neighborhood, we decided to get involved. And we said, okay, why don't we kind of try to transform this problem into an opportunity, and use this vehicle as a literal vehicle to help people, help with the environment, and help people get around transportation deserts, and also help people save money, similar to what Dollaride is trying to do, like have it be affordable economic tool that helps people get healthy and protects the environment. So Restoration led a partnership around introducing City Bike to the neighborhood. We did everything from, all kinds of like intercept surveys, focus groups, all kinds of campaigns to get the community more interested in bike share. So I'll stop there and then you can ask me some questions. I got more. Okay.
Okay, let me go on to Allison for a second. So Allison, in our phone conversation, you told us that you're a lawyer and you're also on your community board. So as opposed to the way, well, maybe similarly to the way City Bike came into Bed-Stuy, can you talk to us about what the interaction normally is between the city when they're planning infrastructure plans and the community board or the community? What kind of say does a community board actually have in these things? When are they approached? Give us that whole background. What's different here? What normally happens?
I would say a lot of it really depends on the community board you're on or involved with, what that interaction looks like or when it comes to play. On certain community boards, I would say like CB17 is the one I'm most familiar with, and it was the one I was on the board of. City agencies will come with a package of a presentation. They are really showing it to that committee and then to the full board, but it's already baked. They're coming to you and it's like, here's 10 minutes of this presentation and we want a yes vote for this. But there's not the time and investment to say, hey, 50 board members have this information before. Let's actually go out into the community. We recognize the 50 people here. That's not everyone, obviously, and not that you could talk to everyone, but you could have a more robust sample size, right? So usually it's already baked. They come to you with the package, you vote yes or no, which is really only happens when you have an effort by people on that board to go out into the community to speak to people who live exactly where the issue may be. And then you get to hear and invite them to the meeting. But usually it's a yes vote. What we wanted to do, especially when it came to a plan to rezone in our community, which really came out of a lot of gentrification and seeing a lot of change in the neighborhood, that people felt that they had no power to be involved with or decide anything, and it's as of right, was to say, okay, how can we do this differently? How can we engage city agencies to come and do walking tours that we developed, that we worked with, got our own consultant to actually help us to develop the sites. And then we developed, these are the stakeholders in the community that you need to interview. These are the people that are invested here because they live here, their families are here, that deserve to be heard and be at every decision-making point. So that's really like now what we're trying to do to change how engagement goes. But really, a lot of the times when projects are coming, especially infrastructure, if they're coming at all, because we saw a lot of infrastructure money, a bill was passed, but I don't really see a lot of digging going on in where I live at all. I see it in other places, but I don't see that level of investment. But the problem is people are often not notified in advance that buildings are, like the ground is going to be dug up, or you just see someone come and spray paint and that's it. But there's not that notification system and involvement so that people feel like that this is, someone respects me enough to tell me what's happening where I live.
Yeah, so in the future, the better way to operate, you mentioned a consultant. Is this WXY?
Yes.
And you found them and brought them into the neighborhood? The community board found them and brought them into the neighborhood?
So I became co-chair of the land use committee. And for me as a lawyer, the first place, if I want to find out who I should talk to about an issue, because at the time I didn't know anything about land use. I just knew I wanted to be involved in my community. I go and look at my CLE trainings. Oh, who's teaching something about, land use? And then I reached out to that person and then they sent me to George James, and George James actually then introduced me to WXY. And that's why I was like, okay, to me, every year that they would come to talk about what, rezoning could look like, it was more, the city would send someone from their agency, but they're not paid by us. So they're actually just acting in whatever that particular mayor's administration's objectives are. That doesn't necessarily coincide with what community is talking about. So we needed to have our own opportunity to have our own consultant who we would pay. And luckily during that year, there was a council member that pushed that every community board would get like a pot of $48,000 that they could do something with. And we chose to spend a lot of our money from that budget to support educating and rezoning and creating workbooks on land use and how to negotiate with your developer next door, all those things, and forums.
Great, wonderful. And Richard, how did NYSERDA get involved when you were putting together this $10 million prize? Was there talk in the community first, or was it the more old-fashioned way where the state agency decides something has to be done and then flops it down?
Yeah, that's a good question. The innovative thing with the Clean Transportation Prizes we had a two-step process. The first part was having a planning process laid out so that there was a lot of, we put in the documents, if you were the requirements for, this planning process, if you were to get some of these funds, is you have to have extensive participation and outreach activities with the communities. So these local communities were heavily involved. And then after that, the second part was the actual implementation of those plans. I think, to your point, both of you are really good points. Community outreach is something that is evolving. It's something that we're trying to incorporate more and more of in our incentive programs, especially with like New York State. We just passed, a milestone climate law where a lot, 35 to 40% of our funds are going to go towards underserved communities. So that is written into law, but actually the hard part is implementing that. So I think moving forward, a lot of our projects are going to be we want to do from the bottom up. I can't speak to, the city level. I'm with the state, but, definitely a lot of the mobility issues that we see, especially in New York City, it's hyper local. So it's hard to say, bring something even from one community board to another community board. And we're trying to bring, the communities that the resources so that they can integrate some of that. And we did that with the prizes, hopefully with CTAP, and we want to keep doing that.
Wonderful. And Tracy, can you tell us what happened prior to this project with the dollar van networks that went through your neighborhood? Were you involved in planning the routes or anything like that?
No, we weren't. I guess what I wanted, I guess we were involved in a project around, because of the City Bike project, and there's a lot. What's interesting about the City Bike project is that there definitely was a planning process, but the real issue about the planning is just like who leads the planning process and who is involved in the planning process. So then Restoration got involved, and we, as a historically Black organization that represents historically Black community, wanted to lead the way in trying to encourage adoption. But what's interesting about the Dollaride project, and why I think this one is so fascinating, but after the City Bike project, I got really interested in, just really focusing on the fact that Bed-Stuy was a transportation desert. So if you think about, like restorations on the heart of Fulton Street, right? But on the northern part of Bed-Stuy, there's like, dense public housing, Marcy, public housing, lots of other public housing developments that, they're in two fair zones. And so, folks, and there's not a lot of access to services. All the services are on the southern part of, Bed-Stuy. So we got really interested in the Dollar Van project after City Bike, and we thought about like, can we do it? We got in a grant, and we did an experimental project where we had a few dollar vans going from the northern part of Bed-Stuy to the southern part of Bed-Stuy. And it was a failed experiment, and the reason why is because we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have the NYSERDA backing, and I didn't know Sue at the time, and so the challenge was we had too few routes and and very little frequency. And so we had, obviously it was too short of a pilot for people to, really take hold to the project, because people were probably in their neighborhoods just wondering what these vehicles were, because they're not used to seeing dollar vans in that neighborhood. So but it was a really interesting project that was actually written up by the Department of Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection. We hope that this project could really revisit it moving forward.
So Sue, how is your project different? How did you work with the community? Maybe it was designing the routes, maybe it was doing something about the stops. I don't know. What's different about the way you do it? And do we have a map? I think we have a map.
Do we have a map? Well, I'll first say that, the project CTAP was different, probably first and foremost because, I had a very personal connection to dollar vans. And I knew that there was more to this story than just implementing charging stations and buying new vehicles. To kind of big up what Allison said, I knew personally lots of drivers. I have family members who were drivers and fleet owners within the dollar van community. And I realized that a lot of these folks typically don't have a voice when it comes to large infrastructure projects. And, their voice would be valuable, especially when you have 10, 20, 30 years of experience driving your neighbors around the city. So that gave me some insight into a different way of creating a project like this that was informed by the people who are local and the drivers themselves, and really the needs of the community, as opposed to a top-down approach coming from just another tech company. So that was like my whole perspective on it. But I think NYSERDA and some of our other supporters and investors, and even the Urban Future Lab, made me want to collaborate with other companies and organizations to build CTAP. And that collaboration manifested itself into this like community engagement approach, where we started working with BKLVLUP to identify charging station sites where we could install charging stations. And then we engaged and collaborated with other local community-based organizations to survey drivers and riders. So I think from top to top down, we found every opportunity to work with people who were living in the community or who had a point of view that was really authentic to the community's perspective. And we tried to engage with them and hire them to do work in order to build out the project. So I think that's what's maybe fundamentally different from other projects that you might see, where there's like a single decision maker and perspective. We are really adhering to multiple people and multiple organizations contributing to the project.
Yeah.
So this, just to piggyback off of Sue, what it does too is an opportunity for us to support the community-based organizations who are doing a lot of this hyper-local community-centered research. And it opens up another lane for us to sustain even what I call like our money pie, like how we support our own organizations. And it's authentic because the fact of the matter is, it's not just extracting information because we live in these communities. And so that means that we're responsible to making sure that that information feedback comes back and there's actual results, because people have to feel the change that you're trying to bring. And one of the ways that we can do that is because we live there, we collect data there, but we know exactly what people are experiencing because we live there ourselves. I grew up riding dollar vans my whole life. I didn't know that, that wasn't something that every area had, because it was normal because we needed it. So it's been a way to take the life and lived experience of these communities and really value them and have them be seen in a way that they can be central to the decision-making of how they go about evolving and also creating new opportunities.
So maybe either of you two women can help me understand how the community would influence things that make a difference, like location of chargers, location of routes, location of stops. And I think both of you have said to me that this is sort of a hedge against gentrification if you're involved. So explain how that all works, either one of you, both of you.
Okay. I'm not going to go so far as to say it's a hedge against gentrification because I feel like that train has kind of left the station already in that sense. But what it does do is provide us an opportunity to, number one, force conversation and acknowledgement of the harm that's been suffered by underserved communities, a realization of the history of the policies that have been enacted that lead us to the results of where we are, but also an opportunity for them to leverage relationships to reinvent how we can do things going forward, recognize that there is development that we need, but to be able to be at the table in the beginning, not just told on the back end what decisions were made, but to be integral in deciding what we need, how we develop it, who gets hired to do that work, and how we can build capacity for other organizations that need to be in the picture and sustain community, and to be able to use these projects as an opportunity to bring many people to the table where I may not have certain private relationships with large organizations that may find what we are doing or the needs of the community an opportunity to work together and build something new and be creative. So that's what I think about what's possible with this. And it recognizes there are jobs and businesses that can be built that will then take it so that we're not just looking we get to be proactive about what we want to see in our community. And it takes into the fact that we get to decide because we plan to be here. People don't just make decisions for us as though we're not going to stay in the community or we have no, means to, or intelligence enough about what we know. In fact, the reality is that communities have so much knowledge about because they're there that doesn't get leveraged, that doesn't get respected for what it is. So this is an opportunity to do things differently.
Yeah. Well, Allison said it all, but I think, again, harkening back to the city bike example, it was, we wanted to be in the driver's seat because if we wanted to be on the driver's seat in the entire effort. And I was, when we were at the table with Department of Health, Department of Transportation, City Bike, everyone had their own agenda, of course, and it was not our agenda. Our agenda was like, how does this benefit us? We're not your consumers. We're trying to see how can this be an economic benefit, for the community where there are jobs, and who is leading these discussions for the future. And one of the things that was interesting that that came out of the discussion, I brought a national organization to the table called Policy Link, and they actually really helped us think about a frame for all of these projects that Allison, you're kind of laying out, is like thinking about who leads, who decide, who benefits, and who's harmed. And so that's really like a critical lens that we have to think about in terms of these projects. And I think what's interesting about the charging stations, as you're referring to, is the question is, who is bringing the project to the community? Who are the trusted messengers who's introducing the project? Because if it's coming from City Hall or Department of Transportation or whoever, NYSERDA, it's not going to be adopted because oftentimes the powers that be don't necessarily reflect the people in the community. So it's what's very different about this project, what's very exciting about this project is that it's led at the heart, by by a Black firm, and, primarily the dollar van drivers are people who reflect the community. So that's, I think it has it's a critical difference. It's not only bottom up, but you think about top down, it's all the way around. It reflects the neighborhoods that it's looking to benefit. So that's what's very different about this project and very exciting about this project.
So I'm just imagining the complexity of trying to work with Con Ed's maps and the maps that you guys might want to draw in a charrette or something, saying, these people need to get here, these people need to get there, and people saying, we want these chargers to be in front of this block of stores because these are community-owned businesses. Sue, how do you put all that in the Mixmaster and figure it out? It's almost impossible. You need interconnection from Con Ed, right? There are certain points where you can and can't do it.
Absolutely. It's a logistical nightmare. My colleague Jordan is here, and Jordan on our team is like the operations guru and head, and he used to have a lot more hair before the project began. But no, in all seriousness, I think what we've realized is that we have to kind of move slower than we originally thought, and really break down this project to its atomic level. So, for example, right now we're at a phase in the project where we've called it the pilot. And although the goal is to deploy over 100 vehicles and install potentially up to 100 new charging stations, we're first starting with 4 vehicles and 4 charging stations, and only deploying those vehicles in Flatbush, right? So we've really reduced the project down to a small enough example that gives us an opportunity to learn, allows us to engage with the utilities like Con Ed and the DOT and other agencies that need to be involved in this process in a very manageable way, where the risk is low. So that's one of the approaches that we've taken that I think is helping us wrap our heads around this labyrinth. But once you get over that hurdle, we now have built some capacity and some confidence throughout the entire coalition, and then we can move forward with a much larger deployment. So that's like the approach that we've been taking to get the project off the ground. But indeed, we're kind of like rewiring transportation in the outer boroughs by supporting dollar vans in this way. So it's going to require a lot of map making, to say the least.
What's funny is, again, what's interesting about the City Bike project, it really introduced me to new players and new technologies. So I think I said on the panel, when we were having a briefing call about the panel a few days ago, it was interesting when we got involved with City Bike, Department of Transportation invited us down to learn about some new technology, about the docking stations, about the needing docking, these charging stations within buildings. And this was about 7 years ago, I think. And I remember at the time, I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Like, how do we get, the building owners, because restoration, we own property, we work with merchants, like, how do we get this adopted, by the neighborhood? But, of course, when I go back to my organization, we're fighting for daily struggles of getting people to work, getting people food, where we got crisis after crisis after crisis. And this is obviously dealing with the charging stations is averting a future crisis, but it wasn't a crisis of now, then. So all that to say is just very interesting that if we could figure out ways that we can really involve the community early and really show them and give them opportunities to benefit, from these new technology, whether it's jobs or the businesses like promote, tourism, get people to shop in their stores. That's what we really need to do so that folks can take advantage of these technologies ahead of time as opposed to now, like after the fact. Now is the time now, but I guess what I'm saying is we could have been at the beginning of these opportunities. So. We could have been 10 years earlier.
I think Sue was in diapers 10 years ago. Okay, so Richard, this is a public-private partnership, or at least a entrepreneur and a community group and your agency all having to dance the dance together. Have you done other things like this? Can you think of other examples of these kinds of three-way partnerships that have come up with good results?
Yeah, so going back to, building on the type of the innovation work that we're doing, both past ones and future ones. I would say in the past, we've used a lot of terms called like community outreach, and that might be a little passive. I admit, it's a lot of times it's like you're going out, you're doing these, you're just checking a box like, oh, we're having this community, we're letting you know about this. And, we're all guilty of that at some point in the past. I think there's a very conscious need, especially now moving forward, to be even more proactive. I think that was the term that we heard is we want to be very proactive with the communities to be able to identify their needs first and also let them direct what they want resolved. I think when you were talking about New York City, and I think that term might have been called participatory budgeting. So it's like things like that. It's like you have this limited set of funds. What would you like to do with it? And I think that's what we're trying to do with, future iterations of the clean transportation prizes. We've done previous work before where, we always do the outreach. We do surveys on, voice of customer is what we call it. And, that's helpful to it to an extent, as like you're understanding your market and all that, but it's definitely a big difference from being proactive, being more bottom up, and letting them lead the project really. So.
Yeah, another example of this that I can think of is something we did at the Urban Future Lab last year, maybe 2 years ago. We have a competition every year where we put out a call for entries for these great clean energy and climate tech companies. And New York Community Trust gives us money for prizes. And the prizes are significant. They're $50,000. So we decided that we ought to start addressing climate justice, which we hadn't done in the past. And our first idea was to do one prize that was just the normal climate tech companies. And the other prize was going to be for an entrepreneur who was going to help replace a peaker plant with batteries or something. And I spoke to a lot of people at not community boards, but community-based organizations to say, so, this is what we're thinking about. What do you think? I spoke to someone at Earth Justice. I spoke to somebody at the one on the very far Upper West Side, who's Peggy Shepherd's organization. I can't remember what it's called.
We Act.
Yes, We Act. And they all said to me, hold on, you think you can decide what that community needs and just plop it down? As I said at the beginning, plop is a really good word for the way we used to design. That's not going to work. You have to go to all of these community-based organizations and say, how would you like to address climate justice and how can we help you? And that's what we ended up doing. And we gave the prize to Nos Quedamos. They're in Melrose in the Bronx. And Nos Quedamos means we stay. They were established, I think, in the 70s or so, when the city said, we're going to railroad into your neighborhood and knock down a bunch of buildings and build some big buildings, and you're going to be really happy with that. And they said, no, we're not going to be happy with that. We are staying here. You are not displacing us. And we want to work with the architect to figure out how we put in new housing. And that's what happened. They did it. And the organization is still alive to this day, working on this kind of methodology, which is new and invented by people like them who started this in the 70s. And we still work with them. We're now working on some community garden projects with them, sort of saying, how can we help you? What do you need? And, you know, we might have some expertise here for solar canopies and batteries, if that's what you need. We're helping them with a lot of those things. So it's a new mindset. It's a new way of thinking, and it's got to be done. Let's see if there's anything else on here.
Yeah, well, you know, I wanted to just maybe give some props to NYSERDA and government in general. You know, surprisingly, I learned relatively recently that, you know, our government agencies on the city and state level truly do appreciate us in the private sector and look to us as the experts on implementing certain projects or bringing technologies to the market. And this was different from my original perception of government. Like, I always thought the government, you know, is the heavy hand setting laws and regulations because they know best. But it actually turns out, especially in New York, that our government agencies are clamoring for us, especially, you know, minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, to be active and participate. And they are, for lack of a better term, like bending over backwards to contract with us and to give us opportunities to, you know, rewrite the wrongs that have been done in the past, as well as to reimagine what our built environment can look like. So I think for any of you here who are entrepreneurial or working at companies that, you know, are going to need some sort of, you know, permitting and engagement with government agencies, recognize that they really need you and want you to step up and are going to be giving you more opportunities than you might have realized. So that was something that was eye-opening to me as we, you know, have began building out this project and are rolling into more and more opportunities to work with the government to do so.
Yeah, New York is really good at this stuff. The one thing that I'm still unclear of is, once you started working with City Bike, what changed? What did they do differently to try to meet the community in the middle?
I mean, I think they did a lot different. I mean, I think the radical thing was that they they bought my idea or my demand that if you want us to be involved, we're going to lead a partnership. And there was a grant, a national grant that I could apply for. And when I looked at this national grant, cities were getting it, bike share companies were getting it. And I insisted the money come to restoration, you know, to lead this partnership. And so they came to the table monthly with restoration and with DOT, Department of Health, and other community stakeholders. And we argue with them. We all are friends right now, but we argued at the beginning about, you know, how adoption was going to work and what were going to be the challenges. And so what we insisted on doing is these surveys and these focus groups. And for example, one thing that changed was they changed policy because of our work. Like, for example, you know, there was, if you knew when City Bike first came into New York City again, there was a discount program for NYCHA residents, and it was like a flat $60 discount. And, you know, one of the things that we said as a partnership was like, okay, first of all, NYCHA is not the proxy for poor, you know, and there are other poor New Yorkers, you know, so we have to like open up the affordability. And so we were able to get another discount program for SNAP recipients. And then we were also able to get City Bike to change the policy to not just a flat $60 discount, but also to have it be a monthly allotment of $5, and you could do $5 and then quit. And then we also got them to try like these innovative pilots. Like, we had a pilot around called Prescribe a Bike, where we were basically prescribing a bike to people who were diabetic or pre-diabetic. So different, pilots to really encourage adoption. We also said that we were worried about our Black and brown children potentially being profiled. And so we actually, started to like think about ways that we could sit down with the police department. So they changed a lot. And then we also like innovated through grant money that I had is incentivizing other groups to be involved. And so we gave many grants, restoration gave many grants, but what's interesting is now that City Bike has been taken over by Lyft, they've institutionalized our grant program. And so they learned a lot, and they will credit restoration to this day with a lot of the things that they've done. So they did listen in many ways. So, yeah.
All right. I think I want to wrap this up and take questions, but unless any of you have anything else you want to say. I think this idea that the story is, we still have to play the story out and see if it really does improve the way the dollar van system will be deployed. I suspect it will. I suspect it will take much longer. I mean, Sue said it takes longer. He's only going to start with 4. And a lot of that is because of the meetings and the making sure everyone is heard. And we certainly noticed that with Nos Quedamos. It will take longer, but there will be more acceptance and less pushback from people in the neighborhood. So in the long run, it's a much better process. So that's what I think. And I'm happy you're all here. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Thomas, do you want to take the mic around?
How you guys doing? My name's Emmanuel. I'm a planning intern at VHB. I am from East New York. I moved to South Jamaica, Queens, and then moved again to Hempstead. So I have 2 questions. First would be, have you guys looked into any municipalities and villages, underserved municipalities and villages? I can think of 3 off the top of my head. And being that I'm from all 3 of those cities, like I understand the transportation desert in South Jamaica, Queens, and I understand how necessary it is to travel from Parsons Archer down to places like Green Acres Mall and stuff like that. But living in Hempstead, it's 3 or 4 times worse, if I don't have my car, I can't go anywhere. So the median income of Hempstead, Baldwin, and I believe Elmont are all $59,000. What would you say? Have you looked into? Yeah, there you go. Have you looked into municipalities and villages?
Great questions. Honestly, we actually haven't yet looked into, I guess, the municipalities and the villages outside of the borough of Queens and Brooklyn. But this is really interesting to me because, generally the whole ethos of CTAP and I think the New York Clean Transportation Prize is to, start with a viable project somewhere, but build a model that is sustainable, that can grow in other places. So I'd love to talk to you after the event to learn about those 3 areas that you're talking about. And, not only have it on our radar, but actually like think through how can we show our example to authorities in those areas and maybe loop them into what we're doing so that, East Hempstead and other areas could be like the next stop. So thank you for the question.
I was just going to add something to that. I think goes back to like that need, right? It's like a very, hyper local need that sometimes it's the transportation planners or the community planners in your community that might be either aware of that or, and I think sometimes that's like the gap that NYSERDA is like trying to address with these type of programs is like, how do we identify that need, work with the people, the policymakers, the decision makers, like whoever can bring in a CTAP into your community. And that's where that public-private partnership would, facilitate. We start a pilot, try it out, and then if it works, then, we're off to the races. So.
I got one more. Is the movie theater still near the Green Acres Mall? Yeah. Oh, man. I saw The Matrix there and I love that movie. All right, we got to work on that too.
Thanks, guys. Great talk. I actually rode a city bike here tonight. I'm in part of Crown Heights that just got them like 3 months ago, and it's a game changer. And I could talk all day about how much I love it. This is like a really inspiring conversation because in my observations, the community boards are often an obstacle to the good, infrastructure improvements like bike lanes, which I am passionate about. And if you look at the McGinnis Boulevard, war over whether to make it a safe street or not, which, has gone off the rails. This is a great way to do it. And I wonder, do you see, or have you thought about, or how do you take that model of, community engagement and grow it? Or, hope it's not just one of those many things that can only happen in Brooklyn, right? It's like, can we take this way of thinking beyond where it is now? Or maybe there's just enough work to do here right now that we should just focus locally.
I mean, it's interesting is that, I get it. It does harken back to the point of everything that it should start local, because I think it's like, how do you empower local voices to dictate their own future and understand, what these projects are all about, and then diversify, get more people on the community board. It all has to come from local, So, and again, I'm thinking about the city bike example. What was interesting about the city bike example was because of the work that we did, Department of I met all these other people at Department of Transportation. They wanted me to go to the community board and speak up about bike lanes. And I'm like, no, I'm talking about city bike, people riding across the neighborhood. And I know, bike lanes are important, but I'm not taking on the community board about the bike lanes, because restoration has a big agenda, housing, jobs, everything. And I'm not going to fight the community board about the bike lanes. I'm not saying it's not important, but what was important for me was like developing an effort where we're empowering local voices to speak for themselves. So what was really exciting about the project for me was I met all these, Black and brown city bike riders, and we got more of them involved. And there was this woman, Quay Lee, who's fabulous. And she started going to the community board. She started going to the community board. She started going to the hearings. She started to advocate and speak up, for these things. So it all has to, and I'm actually now on the board of Transportation Alternatives, for example, but but the whole point is it still has to come from the community, and the community has to understand the benefit of these projects, and they have to be educated. But it starts with changing the people at DOT, maybe, again, from the ground up, always, where are the jobs? How is it going to benefit us? That's all important. And then the one thing I wanted to bring up about the point, what's exciting about the municipality expansion is, again, using an example of these projects over time, projects that we didn't believe in, then they ultimately have momentum. So what was interesting again about the city bike example was, at first it was cacophony about who asked for this? Why is this in my neighborhood? And then now, many years later, there's a sea change of thought of why isn't it in my neighborhood? When is it coming over here to East New York or there? So it can happen over time if it's done the right way, or we wait it out sometimes.
Just to add in, the community board has like an advisory interest, like that's what their vote is. So essentially you kind of, if I were to like advocate or teach someone, it's like you have to get elected officials involved. It's the community board and then whoever the borough president is. Like for the most part, if you get that group of people, you can pretty much get a yes on anything, really. But I think a lot of it is people just don't have the time. Average people don't go to meetings. They don't find out what's going on in their community unless it's right at their front door, until the day they open up their door and see the city bike is right in front of their step. Then it's a problem and then they want to run. But it's not that we don't need these things. These communities need assets, but they need to see that they were involved with them, where they're put that make the most sense based on their lived experience. It's creating, like what we do a lot is like we develop, like I said, walking tours so a community can tell the story of their spaces and what they've experienced with development or whatever it is, but also so that city agencies can get off the computer and on the ground with like people who can help you like kind of be a Sherpa through this is what the reality is of what that change would look like. It's also thinking about ways to like engage younger people through like gamifying how we get data, like so it's fun. Or it could be, I'm toying around this idea of with me, we're 17, who's still ongoing in the rezoning process of using like the five senses to engage people through like tours and experiences so that we could find new ways to gather data and information, but introduce people into things that they really don't care about or don't feel like they have the time to engage in, but in fun, creative ways. So that's the challenge now, is to keep people sustained. But at the end of the day, if we don't build projects where people see themselves in it, or that it makes sense for them in the end, or they don't never see anything develop, then we will lose like a whole generation of people. So
I'll say something really quickly. I think part of your question was like, how can this be replicated in other areas, or is this like a portable model to have community engagement? Elemental Accelerator is a nonprofit investor in climate tech companies and projects. And they, I think, have coined a model called the Square Partnerships. I see Thomas nodding his head vigorously over in the back because he's heard of this. But I think, what I want to share is that like there are concepts that you can use to port this type of ideology to other areas. And then from there, get people to kind of adopt and coalesce around working in a different way. So, Elemental teaches this Square Partnerships model where you have the community involved as one corner of the square, you have a customer, you have an investor, and then you have a startup, right? So this coalition of stakeholders may have enough resources, voice, power, and influence to get things done, and done in a way that's equitable and fair. So I think the portability of this stuff maybe might have to start conceptually, but then from there you can get the right people in the table and in the right room.
Maybe I can make it even smaller. There aren't a lot of city bikes in CB 17, as far as I know. How is that going? You guys interacting?
Yes, they developed this spot that match with pieces that people feel like they would find with it. It didn't have, it's also one of those last remaining bastions of Black home ownership. And this is a driving community. So there is definitely a lot of pushback about what sites make sense. But it's not that we don't want them. It's just that where do they make sense? And we don't want like agencies or anyone else just coming and just saying this is where we're putting it, and that's the end of the story. So that's the give and take. But they are coming.
7:30. So these are great questions. So I'll let you guys decide what you want to do.
I think we're all hungry and tired. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank our panelists and Sue and Thomas who put this together, and my staff who worked on this, and Sue's staff who worked on this. A lot of people put these things together. So thank you to all of them and to you for coming. Take care and ride your city bikes home.
Thanks, Pat. So I would be remiss if I didn't make this announcement. Artie, is it July 27th? July 27th, we have one of our next community engagement events for CTAP. It's going to be at Flatbush Central in Brooklyn, where we're inviting drivers, riders, other community members and stakeholders to a discussion about the program and the next steps, and a chance for them to inform, how do we roll this out from here? So I wanted to just extend that invite to all of you as well, whether you want to be a fly on the wall or even contribute to the conversation. Please look out for updates from Dollaride, Dollaride.com, and we'll probably send some things around through the Urban Future Lab and other channels too.